Tonight, we will go on a journey to discover the ancient secrets of Zen Buddhism on acceptance and surrender. We will understand what stands in its way, what keeps us fighting against life instead of flowing with it. Before we begin, feel free to share what time it is and where you're listening from. Through gentle stories and quiet teachings, we will find our way to a quiet, beautiful peace deep in our soul. So gently close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your breathing slow down. You don't need to understand everything tonight. You only need to listen. And in listening, something in you will begin to soften. Let us begin with our first story. There was once a young monk who lived in a mountain monastery. Every morning he would wake before dawn to tend the garden. The path to the garden wound through a forest where the ground stayed soft from mountain springs. After any rain, this path became a ribbon of thick, clinging mud. The young monk hated this mud. Every morning, he would pick his way carefully along the edges, trying to keep his robes clean, stepping on rocks and roots to avoid the mess. He would arrive at the garden tired and frustrated. His peaceful morning practice had become a battle with the earth itself. One morning, after a heavy storm, the path was worse than ever. The monk stood at the edge looking at the brown river of mud that stretched before him. As he hesitated, he heard footsteps behind him. His teacher approached, walking steadily down the path. Without pause, the old master stepped directly into the mud. His robes darkened as the earth splashed up, but his face remained calm. The young monk watched in surprise. "Master, your robes. They'll be ruined." The teacher smiled and continued walking. "The mud is here. I am here. We meet each other honestly." The student hurried to catch up, still trying to avoid the worst patches. "But surely it's better to stay clean, to avoid unnecessary mess." The master paused and looked back. "Tell me, how much energy do you spend each morning fighting this path?" The young monk considered this. "A great deal, I suppose." "And how much energy do I spend?" "You just walk." "Exactly. I just walk. The mud accepts my feet. My feet accept the mud. There is no conflict, only meeting." They walked the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the garden, the master went to the well and quietly washed his feet and the hem of his robes. The mud came away easily. What had seemed permanent was only temporary. "You see," the teacher said, watching the brown water swirl away, "the mud was not the problem. My resistance to the mud would have been the problem. In this simple story lives a truth that can transform how we meet each day." The young monk's struggle was not with the mud itself. It was with his rejection of what was already present. His resistance turned a simple walk into a source of stress. His refusal to accept the conditions created suffering where none was necessary. This is how resistance works in our lives. We encounter something unpleasant, a difficult conversation, an unexpected delay, a feeling we don't want to have. And instead of meeting it directly, we fight against its existence. We waste energy trying to make it different. We exhaust ourselves arguing with what has already happened. The master understood something profound. Acceptance does not mean happiness about every circumstance. It means meeting circumstances without the additional burden of rejection. The mud was still mud. It was still inconvenient. but by accepting its presence, he could move through it with peace. When we stop fighting what is already here, we discover something surprising. Our resistance was often more uncomfortable than the thing we were resisting. The anticipation of difficulty can be worse than the difficulty itself. The story we tell ourselves about why something shouldn't be happening creates more pain than the actual happening. This doesn't mean becoming passive. The master still walked to the garden. He still tended his duties, but he did so without the inner conflict that exhausts the spirit. He met the mud as a fact of the morning, not as a personal insult from the universe. In your own life, notice where you spend energy fighting what is already present. The weather you cannot change, the personality of a difficult person, the pace at which something is healing or improving. These are the muddy paths of daily existence. You can pick your way around them, wearing yourself out. Or you can step forward with the acceptance of what is real. This acceptance begins with breath. When you encounter resistance in yourself, pause. What would it feel like to stop pushing against this moment and simply meet it? Let your breathing soften now. Feel how your body naturally knows how to accept each breath without fighting it. Your lungs don't resist the air. Your heart doesn't argue with its own beating. There is wisdom in this natural acceptance, a wisdom you can bring to other areas of life. Rest in this understanding. That meeting life directly, even when it's messy, can be more peaceful than fighting it. That acceptance is not defeat. It is intelligence. It is the first step toward real freedom. In a village nestled between mountains, lived people who had grown comfortable with their routines. The village was known for its clear skies and gentle sunshine. Merchants would stop there specifically for the pleasant weather. The villagers took pride in this reputation. They spoke often of their good fortune in living where the sun always seemed to shine. But every region needs rain. The rivers that fed the village came from mountains where storms were necessary. The forests that surrounded them depended on water from the sky. Even their own gardens, in truth, thrived best after a good soaking. The villagers had forgotten this. They had begun to see rain as an intrusion. When clouds gathered, they would look up with worry. "Not today," they would whisper. "Please, not today." They planned around weather forecasts, cancelled gatherings at the first hint of moisture in the air. Some even hung charms and mirrors to try to keep rain away from their perfect skies. One year, a terrible drought began. The river that had always provided water started to shrink. Wells that had never run dry began to empty. The gardens that had been the village's pride started to wither. Still, when clouds finally appeared, many villagers found themselves conflicted. They needed rain desperately, but they had trained themselves to reject it for so long. A wise woman lived at the edge of the village. She was old enough to remember times when rain was welcomed, when people would dance in the street during the first spring shower. She watched her neighbors with sadness as they struggled between their need for water and their habitual resistance to storms. One evening, as the sky grew heavy with long-awaited clouds, she walked through the village center. People were closing their windows, bringing in their hanging clothes, preparing to endure what they all desperately needed. The old woman stood in the square and looked up at the darkening sky. As the first drops began to fall, she did something no one had seen in years. She opened her arms wide. She tilted her face toward the sky. She let the rain fall on her skin without seeking shelter. Children peered out from doorways. Adults watched from windows. Here was someone welcoming what they had all been taught to avoid. As the gentle shower became a steady rain, the old woman began to smile. Then something amazing happened. One child broke away from her mother's side and ran into the square. She stood next to the old woman, laughing as raindrops touched her face. Then another child joined them. Soon, a small group stood in the rain, remembering something they had somehow forgotten. The joy of water falling from the sky. The relief of finally receiving what was needed. The simple pleasure of not fighting against nature's gift. The adults watched from their shelters. Some shook their heads at the foolishness, but others began to remember. They remembered how it felt to need rain and receive it. They remembered the beauty of storms, the freshness of air afterward, the way everything grew more alive. From that day forward, when rain clouds gathered, the village was divided. Some still closed their shutters and complained, but others stepped outside. They remembered that resistance to what is natural and necessary creates suffering. They learned again to welcome what they needed, instead of fearing what they couldn't control. This story speaks to something deep in human nature. Our tendency to resist what we actually need because it doesn't match what we prefer. The villagers' rejection of rain was not just inconvenient. It was working against their own well-being. They had confused comfort with wisdom. They had mistaken control for safety. Rain in this story represents all the necessary but uncomfortable parts of life. Difficult conversations that clear the air. Periods of rest that feel unproductive. Times of sadness that help us process loss. Challenges that help us grow stronger. We need these experiences. But our habitual resistance makes them feel like punishment instead of nourishment. The old woman understood something the others had forgotten. That welcoming what we need, even when it's uncomfortable, brings relief. Not just the relief of finally getting what we require, but the deeper relief of stopping the exhausting fight against reality. Notice in your own life where you might be pushing away something you actually need. Perhaps you need quiet, but you resist slowing down. Perhaps you need to feel your grief, but you stay busy to avoid it. Perhaps you need to have a difficult conversation, but you keep postponing it. These forms of resistance keep you from receiving what would actually help. Acceptance doesn't mean seeking out difficulty. It means stopping the habit of rejecting what is already here. When rain is falling, standing in it can be a choice that brings peace. Not because rain is always pleasant, but because fighting the rain while it's falling adds nothing but misery. This is the gift that acceptance offers. It doesn't promise that life will become easier. It promises that your relationship with difficulty will become wiser. Instead of having one problem, the original difficulty plus your resistance to it, you have only what is actually happening. And what is actually happening is usually more manageable than our stories about why it shouldn't be happening. This is the foundation of all deeper acceptance. Learning to recognize when you are fighting what has already happened. Learning to choose a different response. Not because you have to like everything, but because peace is more valuable than the illusion of control. This insight opens a door to freedom. Because if resistance comes from our thoughts about circumstances rather than from circumstances themselves, then we have more choice than we realized. We cannot always change what happens, but we can begin to notice and soften our automatic rejection of what is already here. Sometimes this means stepping into the mud with the acceptance that feet can be washed. Sometimes it means opening your face to rain that is already falling. Sometimes it means simply letting this moment be what it is, instead of insisting it be something else. The masters in these stories were not superhuman. They had simply learned to work with life instead of against it. They had discovered that acceptance is not a spiritual ideal, but a practical wisdom. A way of moving through existence that conserves energy for what matters most. Allow yourself to rest now in the simplicity of this teaching. That the path to peace often begins with the simple recognition of where you are creating unnecessary conflict. Where you are adding resistance to what is already challenging enough on its own. Let the breath move through you without effort. Let your body settle without forcing relaxation. Let your thoughts come and go without needing to manage them. This is the practice on the smallest level. Accepting what is already happening in this very moment. Tonight, we go deeper into one of life's most challenging and liberating truths. Everything changes. Nothing stays the same. And in this truth lies both sorrow and profound freedom. High in the mountains of Tibet, there lived a community of monks who practiced an ancient art. For centuries, they had created mandalas, intricate, sacred paintings made from colored sand. These mandalas were not small. They stretched across entire floors, every grain of sand placed with infinite care and attention. The creation of a mandala could take weeks, sometimes months. The monks would begin each morning in silence, gathering around the expanding circle of color and pattern. With steady hands and patient hearts, they would add grain after grain of blue sand, red sand, yellow sand, white. No hurried movements. No rushing toward completion. Each moment of creation was itself sacred. The mandalas were breathtaking. Visitors would travel for days to witness them. The geometric patterns seemed to pulse with life. The colors vibrated like music made visible. People would stand at the edges of these sand paintings and feel something shift in their hearts. Here was beauty so pure, so perfect, that it seemed to touch something eternal. One autumn, the monks were nearing completion of their most ambitious mandala ever. For 3 months they had worked. The design reached from wall to wall of their largest meditation hall. Every detail had been considered, refined, perfected. The work represented thousands of hours of devotion, skill, and love. A young monk named Tenzin had joined the community recently. He had worked on small sections of other mandalas before, but this was his first time participating in something so magnificent. As the final grains of sand were placed, as the last symbols took their perfect form, he felt overwhelming pride and attachment to what they had created together. That evening, as the community gathered for their closing ceremony, Tenzin noticed storm clouds building outside the windows. The wind was picking up. He felt a knot of worry in his stomach. All summer, the weather had been calm. But now, just as their masterpiece reached completion, nature seemed to be stirring. The elder who led the ceremony began the traditional closing prayers. He spoke of the mandala's beauty, of the devotion that had created it, of the temporary nature of all things. Tenzin tried to focus on the words, but his attention kept drifting to the windows. The wind was growing stronger. As the ceremony concluded, the elder did something that shocked the young monk. He took a ceremonial brush and, with one gentle sweep, began to disturb the mandala. to mix the colors, to return the carefully placed grains to formlessness. The other monks joined him. They moved with reverence, but they moved without hesitation. Tenzin watched in dismay as months of work dissolved before his eyes. "Master," he whispered urgently, "the storm. If we destroyed it ourselves, why were we worried about the weather destroying it?" The elder paused in his gentle dismantling and smiled. "Tell me, young friend, which brought you more suffering? The wind threatening our creation, or your attachment to keeping it unchanged?" Tenzin considered this. His anxiety about the storm had been painful, but watching the intentional dissolution was somehow peaceful, even beautiful in its own way. "Now you begin to understand," the elder continued. "The mandala was never meant to last forever. Its perfection was never in its permanence. Its beauty was in the love we brought to each moment of creating it. That love remains untouched, even as the sand returns to sand." As they finished their gentle destruction, collecting the mixed sand to return to the mountain stream below, wind began to rattle the windows more forcefully. But Tenzin found that he was no longer afraid. There was nothing left to lose, nothing left to protect. Only the memory of creation, only the love that had guided their hands, only the teaching that was now alive in his heart. "You see," the master said as they watched the colored sand dissolve into the flowing water, "we practiced impermanence not to become careless about beauty. We practiced it to love beauty without fear, to create without clinging, to give our full attention to what we do while holding the results lightly." That night, as Tenzin lay in his simple bed listening to the storm pass over their mountain, he understood something new. The mandala had taught him not just about art, but about life. About how to love completely without demanding that anything last forever. About how to work with devotion while holding outcomes gently. About how true security comes not from making things permanent, but from accepting their temporary nature. This ancient practice holds wisdom that can transform how we hold everything we love. The monks understood what most of us struggle to accept: that trying to make the temporary permanent is a source of constant anxiety. That our attachment to keeping things unchanged actually prevents us from fully enjoying them while they're here. Think about how this appears in your own life. The way you worry about losing health, relationships, or circumstances that bring you joy. The energy you spend trying to freeze moments that are meant to flow. The fear that shadows beautiful experiences because you know they cannot last forever. This is the suffering that comes from fighting impermanence instead of dancing with it. The young monk's anxiety about the storm was not really about wind and weather. It was about his attachment to keeping something beautiful exactly as it was. His suffering came not from change itself, but from his resistance to change. When he learned to hold the mandala's beauty lightly, the actual changing became peaceful, even sacred. This does not mean becoming indifferent to beauty or love. The monks did not create their mandala carelessly because they knew it would be temporary. They created it with even greater care because they understood its precious impermanence. They brought full attention to each grain of sand precisely because they knew the moment of placing it would never come again. And what else do you see? This was harder. Kenji sat quietly, looking not just with his eyes, but with his heart. Slowly, understanding began to dawn. I see that it's fully alive right now, not trying to be anything other than what it is in this moment. The master smiled and continued his work. The tree does not worry about autumn while it prepares for spring. It does not hold back its blossoms from fear of winter. It gives everything to each season as that season arrives. It lives completely in the rhythm of appearing and disappearing without resistance. They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Then the master spoke again, so softly that Kenji had to lean close to hear. I have loved this tree for many years. I have seen it through drought and storm, through seasons of abundance and seasons of struggle. I know that someday, perhaps soon, perhaps many years from now, it will complete its life cycle. And when that day comes, I will compost its body with the same love I have given to its growth. Kenji felt something shift in his chest. But how can you speak of that without sadness? 0. 5. Who says I speak of it without sadness? Sadness is natural when we love something temporary. But I don't let my sadness about the tree's eventual ending prevent me from loving it fully right now. I don't let my knowledge of autumn diminish my joy in spring. The master stood and brushed soil from his hands. The tree teaches me how to live, Kenji. How to give everything to this moment without holding back from fear of loss. How to love completely without demanding permanence. How to find freedom through accepting rather than fighting the natural cycle of all things. As the weeks passed and the cherry tree burst into full bloom, Kenji began to understand the master's teaching more deeply. He watched how the old man would sit beneath the flowering branches each morning, not trying to make the blossoms last longer, not photographing them or grasping at their beauty, just receiving their gift fully while it was being offered. When the blossoms eventually fell, creating a pink carpet beneath the tree, the master gathered them gently and added them to his compost pile. His face showed no regret, only gratitude for what had been and anticipation for what would come next. He was already watching for the first signs of new leaves, the next stage of the tree's generous unfolding. That autumn, as Kenji prepared to leave the monastery and return to his life in the world, he asked the master one final question. How do I take this teaching with me? How do I remember to live like the tree when I'm afraid of losing what I love? 0. 5. The master walked with him to the garden gate. The cherry tree stood magnificent in its autumn colors, every leaf a different shade of red and gold. Carry this image in your heart, the master said. Remember that this tree has never been more beautiful than it is right now, dressed for its seasonal death. It teaches us that endings can be as beautiful as beginnings when we meet them without resistance. And remember this too. The tree's roots run deep into earth that has been nourished by countless other trees that have lived and died before it. Nothing is ever truly lost. Everything that lives and loves and passes away becomes part of the great continuing. Your fear of impermanence comes from thinking you are separate from this flow. But you are part of it. You are held by it. As Kenji walked down the mountain path, carrying the master's teaching in his heart, he felt something he had never experienced before. A deep sense of belonging to the rhythm of life. A trust that he could love fully without needing to make anything permanent. A peace that came from accepting his place in the great dance of appearing and disappearing that includes all beings. This story offers us a different way to hold our awareness of impermanence. Not as a philosophical idea, but as a lived wisdom. The master didn't achieve peace by pretending that nothing ever ends. He found peace by learning to love within the reality of constant change. Notice how the master's acceptance of impermanence made him more present, not less. Because he knew the cherry blossoms would fall, he paid attention to them while they bloomed. Because he understood that his time with the tree was limited, he treasured each season more fully. His acceptance of ending enhanced rather than diminished his capacity for love. This is the paradox of impermanence. When we stop trying to make temporary things permanent, we become more available to enjoy them while they're here. When we accept that everything we love will change, we can love more freely, without the constant anxiety of trying to control outcomes we cannot control. This does not eliminate sadness when things end. The Master acknowledged that sadness is natural when we love something temporary. But his approach prevented the additional suffering that comes from demanding that temporary things be permanent. It allowed him to experience loss without being defeated by it, to grieve without being overwhelmed by grief. From this understanding comes a different kind of courage. The courage to love deeply even though loss is inevitable. The courage to invest fully in relationships and projects that won't last forever. The courage to bloom completely in whatever season you find yourself, without holding back from fear of autumn. The deep teaching of impermanence is not that life is meaningless because everything ends. It is that life becomes infinitely precious precisely because it cannot be repeated. Each moment arrives once. Each breath is unrepeatable. Each person you love is a unique expression of consciousness that will never appear again in exactly this form. When the monks dissolved their sand mandala, they were not saying that beauty doesn't matter. They were celebrating that beauty can be so pure it doesn't need to last forever to be perfect. When the Master loved his cherry tree while accepting its eventual death, he was not being cold or detached. He was loving it exactly as it was, a temporary flowering in the great garden of existence. As your breath grows slower and your body settles into rest, let go of the need to make anything permanent. Let yourself appreciate this moment for what it offers without demanding that it last forever. Let yourself love without demanding guarantees. Let yourself live fully within the reality of constant change. This is your invitation. To live like the tree. To bloom fully when it's time for blooming. To let go gracefully when it's time for letting go. To trust the seasons of your own life without trying to control their timing. To give everything to this moment while holding tomorrow lightly. In accepting impermanence, you don't lose anything real. You only lose the exhausting illusion that you were supposed to make temporary things permanent. What you gain is immeasurable. Freedom from constant anxiety about loss. Ability to love without fear. Capacity to appreciate beauty without needing to possess it. Trust in the natural flow of existence. As we continue deeper on our journey together, we explore something that many of us find more difficult than accepting external change. We explore how to meet ourselves with kindness. How to treat the person you know most intimately, yourself, with the same gentleness you might offer a dear friend. Perhaps you recognize this inner voice, the one that criticizes your mistakes, the one that says you're not progressing fast enough on any path that matters. This inner judge affects everyone. But Buddhist wisdom offers a different way to relate to your own humanity. In a monastery high in the mountains, there lived a young monk named Dogen who had come seeking peace and enlightenment. He had read many texts about meditation and mindfulness. He understood the teachings intellectually and felt ready to develop the same serene presence he saw in his teachers. Dogen threw himself into practice with tremendous effort. He woke before dawn to sit in meditation. He maintained silence throughout much of the day. He ate simply, dressed plainly, and tried to cultivate the equanimity he believed a good practitioner should possess. But his mind had other plans. During meditation, instead of the peaceful emptiness he expected, Dogen's thoughts ran wild. He would plan conversations he might have, replay embarrassing moments from his past, or worry about whether he was meditating correctly. Sometimes he would notice his mind wandering and jolt back to his breath, only to find moments later that he was lost in thought again. The more this happened, the more frustrated Dogen became. He had been practicing for months and still felt like a beginner. During meditation periods, he would watch other monks sitting perfectly still and assume they had achieved states of blissful concentration, while he continued to struggle with the most basic aspects of mindfulness. After particularly difficult meditation sessions, Dogen would mentally catalogue his failures. I couldn't focus for more than a few moments. My back hurt and I kept shifting positions. I felt angry when that bird outside kept calling. I'm terrible at this. I'll never develop real wisdom. This inner commentary became almost constant. Dogen noticed that he was developing two problems instead of one. Not only did his mind wander during meditation, but now he also spent considerable energy judging himself for having a wandering mind. He was suffering both from distraction and from his resistance to distraction. One morning, after a particularly frustrating meditation session, Dogen approached his teacher, an elderly monk named Ijo who had been practicing for over 40 years. Dogen bowed respectfully and explained his difficulty. Master, I have been practicing diligently for many months, but my mind remains chaotic. I cannot achieve even a few minutes of real concentration. The other monks seem to have natural abilities that I lack. I wonder if I am suited for this path. Master Ijo listened quietly, his face showing gentle attention rather than judgment. When Dogen finished speaking, the teacher was silent for a long moment. Then he spoke softly. Tell me, Dogen, when you notice that your mind has wandered during meditation, what is your first response? I try to immediately return to my breath, Master. And what do you feel when you notice the wandering? Dogen considered this. I feel frustrated, disappointed in myself, sometimes angry. And do these feelings help your mind become more focused? No, Master. They seem to create more disturbance. Master Ijo nodded. I see. And tell me, when a small child is learning to walk, what happens when they fall down? They get back up and try again. Do they spend time criticizing themselves for falling? No, they just continue practicing. And if their parents constantly criticized them each time they stumbled, telling them they are failures at walking, how would this affect their learning? Understanding began to dawn in Dogen's eyes. It would make learning much more difficult. It would create fear and self-doubt. Master Ijo smiled gently. Exactly. Now, tell me, who has been the harshest critic of your meditation practice? I have, Dogen admitted quietly. And has this criticism helped your practice develop more smoothly? No. It has made everything harder. The teacher leaned forward slightly. Dogen, you came here seeking wisdom and peace. But you have been treating your own mind like an enemy to be defeated rather than a friend to be understood. You have been expecting yourself to master in months what most people spend years learning. This is not wisdom. This is violence disguised as spiritual effort. They sat in silence while these words settled. Then, Master Ijo continued, "True meditation is not about forcing your mind into perfect stillness. It is about developing a kind and aware relationship with whatever your mind offers. When thoughts arise, you can notice them with curiosity rather than judgment. When your mind wanders, you can gently guide it back, like helping a friend find their way home." "But Master, doesn't accepting my wandering mind mean I'll never develop concentration?" "Let me ask you something. Have you noticed that your mind wanders?" "Of course. Constantly. And this noticing, is it not itself a form of awareness?" Dogen paused. He had been so focused on his failures that he hadn't considered this. "I suppose it, Ireland. Every time you notice your mind has wandered, you are experiencing a moment of mindfulness. The wandering itself is not the problem. The problem is your war against wandering. This war prevents you from appreciating the awareness that notices wandering." Master Ijo suggested a different approach. "For the next week, I want you to practice meditation with one simple intention. Instead of trying to stop thoughts, practice greeting them kindly. When you notice your mind has wandered, say quietly to yourself, 'Hello, thinking.' Then gently return to your breath. Treat your wandering mind the way you would treat a beloved but distractible child. What if I am still distracted constantly? Then you will have many opportunities to practice kindness." Over the following days, Dogen experimented with this new approach. When he caught his mind planning or worrying, instead of criticizing himself, he would silently say, "Hello, planning," or "Hello, worrying," with the same gentleness he might use greeting an old friend. Then, he would guide his attention back to his breath. Something remarkable began to happen. The more kindly he greeted his wandering thoughts, the less power they seemed to have over him. Instead of getting caught in lengthy mental stories, he would notice them more quickly and return to the present moment with less struggle. His meditation began to feel less like a battle and more like a gentle conversation. Perhaps more importantly, this kindness during formal meditation began to affect Dogen's entire relationship with himself. When he made mistakes in other areas of monastery life, when he dropped a bowl or spoke when silence was called for, he found himself responding with curiosity rather than harsh self-judgment. Clumsiness is here, or impulsiveness is here, he might observe, and then simply take appropriate action to address the situation. After several weeks of this practice, Dogen reported to Master Ijo that his meditation had transformed. Not because his mind had stopped wandering, but because his relationship with wandering had completely changed. "Master, I understand now. The mind wanders because that is the nature of an untrained mind. Fighting this nature created suffering. Accepting it with kindness creates space for natural development." Master Ijo smiled. "And what else have you discovered?" "That the awareness which notices wandering is actually quite stable. It has been there all along, watching everything with perfect attention. I was just too busy fighting to recognize it." Yes, self-compassion does not make you weak or undisciplined. It reveals the strength that was always present beneath the struggle. It shows you that you are already capable of the very awareness you thought you had to achieve through force. This story illuminates something essential about spiritual practice and human growth. The part of Dogen that noticed his wandering mind was already awake, already mindful. But his harsh self-judgment created so much inner noise that he couldn't recognize this natural awareness. This pattern appears everywhere in human experience. We want to change something about ourselves, so we declare war on our current state. But this internal conflict actually reinforces the very patterns we want to transform. When we fight our anxiety, we become anxious about being anxious. When we judge our anger, we become angry about our anger. When we criticize our lack of progress, we become frustrated about our frustration. Self-compassion offers a different approach. Instead of trying to force ourselves into some idealized state, we practice meeting our actual experience with kindness. This doesn't mean being passive about growth or change. It means creating the kind of inner environment where natural development can occur. Think about how you learn any skill. If you're learning to play an instrument, harsh criticism from a teacher typically creates tension that interferes with progress. But encouragement, combined with gentle correction, supports learning. Your relationship with yourself can follow the same principle. Kindness toward your mistakes creates space for improvement. Harsh judgment creates tension that often prevents the very growth you're seeking. Self-compassion also helps us recognize that struggle is universal. Every person learning to meditate experiences wandering thoughts. Every person trying to grow spiritually faces inner resistance. Every human being makes mistakes and moves through life imperfectly. When we treat our own difficulties as evidence of personal failure, we forget this basic truth about the human condition. The Buddhist understanding of self-compassion is grounded in wisdom rather than sentiment. It recognizes that harsh self-judgment actually comes from ignorance about the nature of growth and change. Real progress happens gradually, with setbacks and breakthroughs appearing in unpredictable cycles. Expecting yourself to develop in a linear way towards some perfect state is like expecting a tree to grow in a straight line toward the sunday. Master Ejo's teaching about greeting thoughts kindly points to something profound. The awareness that can say, "Hello, thinking," to a wandering mind is itself undisturbed by the thinking. It is spacious enough to include all mental activity without being overwhelmed by any of it. Self-compassion helps us recognize and rest in this natural spaciousness. The monks in our story understood that spiritual practice is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming intimate with your actual experience and responding to it with increasing wisdom and kindness. This intimacy includes awareness of your limitations, your patterns, your areas of ongoing growth, held within an overall atmosphere of acceptance rather than war. As Dogen discovered, this approach doesn't make you complacent. It reveals energy that was previously locked in self-conflict and makes it available for actual development. When you're not spending mental energy fighting your humanness, that energy becomes available for presence, learning, and genuine transformation. Notice how your body feels when you consider treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend who was struggling. Notice what happens to your breathing, to the tension in your chest or shoulders when you imagine meeting your own imperfections with gentleness rather than criticism. In a temple known for its beautiful gardens, there lived a teacher named Myoan who was respected throughout the region for her wisdom and compassion. Students would travel great distances to learn from her, drawn by stories of her patient guidance and profound understanding of the Dharma. But those closest to Myoan knew something that might have surprised her many admirers. Despite decades of practice and teaching, she still struggled with periods of deep self-doubt. Sometimes she would question whether she truly understood the teachings she shared. Sometimes she wondered if her guidance was helping or hindering her students. Sometimes she felt like an imposter, afraid that others would discover she was just another human being fumbling toward understanding. For many years, Myoan had hidden these doubts carefully. She believed that a mature teacher should have moved beyond such uncertainties. She thought that admitting confusion would undermine her ability to help others. So she kept her doubts private, sharing them with no one, not even her closest Dharma friends. One autumn, a young student named Sato arrived at the temple. She was brilliant and dedicated, but also perfectionistic and extremely hard on herself. During daily interviews with Myoan, Sato would confess her meditation difficulties with obvious shame. She spoke of her wandering mind, her emotional reactions, her inability to maintain equanimity with a tone of deep self-hatred that was painful to witness. "Teacher, I meditate every day, but I'm still filled with anger and jealousy. I read the sutras, but I don't feel the peace they describe. I watch other students and they seem to have insights I can't access. I wonder if I have some fundamental defect that prevents me from developing wisdom." Week after week, Myoan offered gentle guidance, reminding Sato that spiritual development takes time, that difficulties are part of the path, that comparing herself to others often creates unnecessary suffering. But despite these teachings, Sato's relationship with her own experience remained harsh and unforgiving. Watching Sato struggle, Myoan began to recognize something uncomfortable. The student's harsh self-judgment was almost identical to the inner voice that Myoan herself had been hiding for years. Sato was simply expressing outwardly what Myoan had been experiencing inwardly. The teacher realized she could not effectively help her student learn self-compassion while she herself was practicing self-criticism. One evening, as autumn rains began to fall, Myoan made a difficult decision. During their next interview, when Sato again shared her self-doubts with obvious shame, the teacher chose to respond with unprecedented honesty. "Sato, I want to share something with you that I have never told any student. I have been practicing and teaching for many years, and I still experience doubt almost daily. Even this morning, before our conversation, I wondered whether I had any wisdom worth sharing. I questioned whether my understanding of the Dharma was clear enough to guide others." Sato looked up in surprise. She had assumed that teachers, especially ones as respected as Myoan, had moved beyond such basic struggles. Myoan continued gently. "For years, I believed that having these doubts meant something was wrong with my practice. I thought that mature practitioners should feel confident and clear all the time. But recently I've begun to wonder if my shame about doubt was creating more suffering than the doubt itself. But teacher, if even you experience uncertainty, how can any of us hope to find peace?" That's exactly the misunderstanding I want to address. I've begun to see that doubt itself is not the enemy. Doubt can be wisdom. It can keep us humble, keep us questioning, prevent spiritual arrogance. The problem is not the presence of doubt. The problem is believing that doubt means we're doing something wrong. Myoan settled more comfortably on her cushion, her usual formal teaching posture softening into something more intimate. I've discovered something important through my own struggle with self-judgment. When I treat my doubts and confusion with kindness instead of trying to eliminate them, they become less solid. They stop controlling how I feel about myself or my practice. I can acknowledge uncertainty without believing it means I'm failing. How do you practice this, teacher? I've learned to speak to my doubtful thoughts the way I would speak to a worried friend. When the voice arises that says I don't understand the Dharma deeply enough, I might respond inwardly, yes, doubt is here. That's okay. Everyone learning experiences uncertainty. This doesn't make the doubt disappear, but it changes my relationship to it completely. Sato was quiet for several minutes, absorbing this unexpected teaching. Finally, she asked, "Does treating yourself kindly make you less motivated to grow?" Myoan smiled. Actually, the opposite had happened. When I stopped wasting energy fighting my humanness, more energy became available for actual learning. When I stopped demanding that my spiritual development follow some idealized timeline, I could appreciate the progress that was actually occurring. Self-compassion revealed insights that self-criticism had been obscuring. Over the following weeks, Myoan shared more of her own learning process with Sato. She spoke about times when her meditation felt dry and mechanical, periods when she struggled with fundamental teachings, moments when her reactions to difficult students revealed her own unhealed places. But she shared these experiences not as confessions of failure, but as examples of the ongoing nature of spiritual growth. I used to think that awakening meant reaching some final state where struggle ended, Myoan explained during one of their conversations. But I'm beginning to understand that awakening might be more about how we meet struggle than about eliminating it. It might be about responding to our difficulties with increasing wisdom and kindness, rather than transcending difficulty altogether. This perspective began to transform Sato's entire approach to practice. Instead of meditating with the goal of eliminating unwanted experiences, she began sitting with curiosity about whatever arose. When jealousy appeared in her mind, instead of immediately judging it as evidence of spiritual failure, she would observe it with gentle interest. Ah, jealousy is visiting today. What does it feel like in my body? What thoughts does it bring? How long does it tend to stay? The change in Sato's relationship with her own experience was gradual but profound. She still felt anger, jealousy, and confusion, but these emotions no longer carried the additional weight of shame. Without the secondary suffering of self-judgment, the primary emotions moved through her more easily, like weather systems passing through an open sky. Perhaps most surprisingly to both teacher and student, this gentler approach seemed to accelerate rather than hinder Sato's development. When she wasn't spending energy fighting her humanness, more attention became available for actual awareness. When she wasn't measuring her worth by the presence or absence of particular emotions, she could investigate her inner life with genuine curiosity rather than strategic manipulation. Several months later, Sato approached Myoan with a realization that had emerged during her morning meditation. "Teacher, I think I understand something important. I've been trying to become someone worthy of compassion instead of practicing compassion for who I already am. I thought I had to earn kindness from myself by improving. But self-compassion isn't a reward for good spirituality. It's the foundation that makes authentic spiritual growth possible." Myoan nodded with deep satisfaction. "Yes. And what else have you noticed?" "That all my harsh self-judgment was actually a form of pride. It assumed I should be further along than I am, should be different from who I am. Self-compassion is more humble. It accepts that I'm a human being learning gradually, making mistakes, growing in fits and starts like everyone else." Beautiful. And how has this affected your relationship with other students? Sato considered this. "I'm much less judgmental of their struggles because I'm less judgmental of my own. When I see someone else having difficulty with jealousy or anger, I recognize my own experience in theirs. It creates connection instead of comparison. From that point forward, Myoan began incorporating more honesty about her own ongoing learning into her teaching. Not in a way that undermined her role as a guide, but in a way that demonstrated the very self-compassion she was encouraging in others. Students began to see that spiritual maturity included the willingness to acknowledge limitation and uncertainty without shame. The temple's atmosphere gradually shifted as this approach spread throughout the community. Students became more willing to share their actual struggles instead of presenting idealized versions of their practice. Teachers acknowledged their own areas of continued growth. The whole Sangha began practicing the kind of honest self-acceptance that creates space for genuine transformation. Years later, when Sato had become a teacher herself, she would often share the lessons she learned from Myoan's vulnerable honesty. Self-compassion is not a consolation prize for people who can't achieve real spiritual attainment. It is the attitude that makes real attainment possible. This story reveals something essential about the relationship between self-acceptance and spiritual growth. Myoan's willingness to acknowledge her own ongoing struggles didn't diminish her wisdom. It demonstrated the very quality that made her an effective teacher, the ability to meet human experience, including her own, with kindness rather than judgment. The shift from hiding her doubts to acknowledging them with compassion freed energy that had been locked in the exhausting effort of maintaining a perfect image. This energy became available for genuine presence and deeper understanding. Her honesty also created permission for others to relate more authentically to their own experience. Notice how self-compassion in this story is not sentimental or indulgent. It doesn't make excuses for unskillful behavior or avoid the real work of growth. Instead, it creates the inner environment where honest self-examination becomes possible. When you're not afraid of discovering flaws in yourself, you can look more clearly at areas that need attention. The Buddhist path includes the development of what is sometimes called wise discernment. This is the ability to see clearly what is happening without getting lost in reactivity about what you see. Self-compassion supports wise discernment by removing the fear and shame that often distort our self-perception. When Sato learned to greet her jealousy with curiosity instead of self-attack, she could investigate its patterns more clearly. She could notice what triggered it, how it felt in her body, what thoughts accompanied it, how long it typically lasted. This clear seeing naturally led to wiser responses. But this investigation would have been impossible while she was spending most of her energy judging herself for having jealous feelings in the first place. This points to a paradox that many spiritual practitioners discover. Accepting yourself as you are becomes the foundation for natural transformation. Not because you're trying to change, but because acceptance creates space for your deeper wisdom to emerge. When you're not fighting your present experience, energy becomes available for responding to it more skillfully. The story also illustrates how self-compassion affects relationships with others. When Myoan stopped hiding her own struggles, she became more capable of helping Sato with hers. When Sato developed a kinder relationship with her own difficulties, she naturally extended more understanding to fellow students facing similar challenges. This is not surprising when you consider how internal and external relationships often mirror each other. If you treat your own humanity harshly, you're likely to be impatient with human imperfection in others. If you can meet your own mistakes with kindness and learning, you're more likely to respond to others' mistakes with wisdom rather than judgment. True humility includes accepting your place in the ordinary timeline of human learning. This acceptance doesn't make you complacent. It makes you realistic about what growth actually looks like, which paradoxically supports more effective effort toward that growth. Every moment offers a new opportunity to practice meeting your experience with kindness rather than judgment. Not because you have to, but because you can. Because self-compassion is always available as an alternative to self-attack. Because treating yourself as a friend rather than an enemy actually supports the very development you're seeking. Rest now in this understanding. That growth happens naturally when it's not obstructed by harsh judgment. That awareness develops organically when it's supported by kindness. That the very acceptance of your current experience creates space for new possibilities to emerge, not through force, but through the simple removal of internal resistance to what is already true about this moment. As we continue on our journey together, we will discover how accepting others as they are paradoxically creates more room for authentic relationships and natural growth than trying to change them ever could. In a mountain village, there was a small temple where a patient master named Hakuin had been teaching for over 20 years. Students came from neighboring towns to learn meditation and Dharma, drawn by his reputation for wisdom and clarity. Most students stayed for several months, learned what they needed, and returned to their daily lives with grateful hearts. But one student was different. His name was Jishin, and he had been coming to the temple for nearly 3 years. While other students seemed to absorb the teachings naturally, Jishin argued with almost everything. If Hakuin spoke about letting go of attachments, Jishin would interrupt with questions about why attachment was wrong if it motivated people to care for their families. If the master discussed the impermanence of emotions, Jishin would insist that some emotions should be permanent and that accepting their temporary nature was irresponsible. During group meditation sessions, Jishin would fidget loudly, sigh with obvious frustration, and sometimes stand up and leave before the period ended. When other students shared insights during Dharma discussions, Jishin would often respond by explaining why their understanding was incomplete or misguided. His presence created noticeable tension in what had previously been a harmonious learning environment. Many of the other students approached Hakuin privately to express their frustration with Jishin's disruptive behavior. They suggested that perhaps he wasn't ready for these teachings, or that he might be more suited to a different style of practice, or that his argumentative nature was disturbing their own development. Some even hinted that the master should ask Jishin to leave. Hakuin listened to these concerns with characteristic patience, but he did not ask Jishin to leave. Instead, he continued teaching as he always had, neither avoiding Jishin's interruptions nor engaging in lengthy debates with him. When Jishin argued, Hakuin would listen fully and then continue with his planned lesson. When Jishin disrupted meditation, Hakuin would maintain his own stillness without making any special accommodations or corrections. This approach puzzled some of the newer students. They expected their teacher to manage the disruptive student more directly. But the longer-term students began to notice something interesting. Hakuin's unwavering acceptance of Jishin's difficult behavior was itself a teaching. The master was demonstrating exactly the kind of non-reactive presence he had been describing in his Dharma talks. One evening, after a particularly challenging session in which Jishin had questioned nearly every point of the teaching, a senior student named Endo approached Hakuin during walking meditation. "Master, I don't understand your approach with Jishin. His constant arguments seem to interfere with everyone's learning, including his own. Wouldn't it be more compassionate to help him find a practice environment better suited to his temperament?" Hakuin continued walking slowly along the garden path. "Tell me, Endo, when you encounter someone in daily life who irritates you, what do you typically do?" "I try to avoid them if possible." If I can't avoid them, I try to change the subject or end the interaction quickly. I see. And how often does this approach result in you feeling more patient with difficult people? Endo thought about this honestly. Not often. I suppose I just become more sensitive to behaviors that annoy me. Exactly. So, in your daily life, you practice avoiding difficulty. Then you come to the temple hoping to develop equanimity. But how can you learn to remain peaceful around challenging people if you only practice being around easy people? They walked several more steps in silence while this perspective settled. But Master, surely there's a difference between accepting someone's difficult personality and allowing them to disrupt the learning environment for others. Hakuin paused beside a small pond where evening light reflected off the still water. Let me ask you something else. When Jishin argues during a teaching, what happens to your own mind? I feel frustrated. Sometimes angry. I start thinking about how he's wasting everyone's time. And when he fidgets during meditation, my attention gets pulled away from my own practice. I start focusing on his sounds instead of my breath. So Jishin's behavior reveals places where your own equanimity is still developing? Endo considered this reluctantly. Yes, I suppose it does. Then perhaps he is offering you something valuable. Perhaps he is showing you exactly where your practice needs to deepen. If you only meditate around people who sit perfectly still, how will you learn to maintain awareness in the midst of distraction? This conversation continued over several evenings as Endo began to understand the master's perspective more deeply. Hakuin explained that Jishin's argumentative nature wasn't something to be eliminated but understood. Some people learn by testing ideas against their existing beliefs. Some people process new information by expressing doubt and resistance before they can integrate it fully. Jishin is not trying to create problems, Hakuin explained. He is trying to understand. His questions, even when they seem combative, come from genuine confusion about how these teachings apply to real life. If I dismiss his concerns or ask him to leave, he learns nothing. If I try to force him to accept ideas before he's worked through his doubts, his understanding will be superficial. But what about the effect on other students? That depends entirely on how the other students choose to respond to him. If they use his presence as motivation to develop genuine patience and compassion, he becomes their teacher. If they spend their time judging him and wishing he were different, they create their own suffering while learning nothing. Several months later, something unexpected began to happen. Jishin's arguments became less frequent and more thoughtful. Instead of immediately rejecting new ideas, he would listen to the teaching, ask clarifying questions, and express his doubts more respectfully. His meditation posture stabilized, and while he still occasionally left sessions early, he did so quietly without disturbing others. More importantly, the other students noticed changes in themselves. Those who had initially been most frustrated with Jishin found that their patience in daily life had increased significantly. They were less reactive to difficult people at work, more understanding with family members who had annoying habits, more capable of maintaining inner calm in challenging social situations. During one of their evening conversations, Endo shared this insight with Hakuin. Master, I think I understand now. Jishin wasn't the problem requiring a solution. Our reactions to Jishin were the learning opportunity. And what have you discovered through this learning? That trying to change other people is exhausting and usually ineffective. But using other people's difficult behaviors as practice opportunities for developing patience actually works. It strengthens qualities I want to cultivate. Hakuin smiled. Yes. And what else? That Jishin himself changed naturally once he felt accepted rather than judged. When we stopped resisting his argumentative nature, he stopped needing to defend it so aggressively. Excellent. You have discovered that acceptance often creates space for natural transformation where force creates resistance. Years later, when Endo had become a teacher himself, he would often tell his students about the gift that Jishin had unknowingly provided. Difficult people are not obstacles to your spiritual development, he would say. They are opportunities to practice with challenging emotions while those emotions are actually arising. They teach you whether your equanimity is real or just conceptual. This story reveals a profound truth about how acceptance affects relationships. The master's approach with Jishin demonstrates that trying to change others often backfires, while accepting them creates conditions where natural growth can occur. This doesn't mean tolerating harmful behavior, but it means recognizing that your peace cannot depend on others behaving exactly as you prefer. Notice how the student's frustration with Jishin was actually revealing their own areas of continued reactivity. When someone triggers strong emotions in you, that reaction points to places where your equanimity could deepen. Instead of seeing these people as problems to be solved, you can view them as teachers showing you where practice is needed. The master understood something that conflicts with common intuition. Resistance often strengthens whatever you're resisting. When we push against someone's annoying qualities, they often become more entrenched. But acceptance creates space where people can relax defensive patterns and express their better nature more easily. This doesn't mean becoming passive or allowing yourself to be mistreated. Setting boundaries is sometimes necessary and can be done without judgment or resentment. You can choose to limit contacts with people who consistently create problems while still wishing them well internally. But boundaries work better when they come from clarity rather than anger. The transformation that occurred in Jishin illustrates how people often soften when they feel accepted rather than judged. Much difficult behavior comes from feeling misunderstood or criticized. When that pressure is removed through genuine acceptance, the defensive aspects of personality often relax naturally. Perhaps most importantly, practicing acceptance with difficult people develops your capacity for patience and compassion in all relationships. If you can remain centered around someone who triggers you strongly, maintaining peace around easier people becomes simpler. Challenging relationships become a training ground for the very qualities you want to embody. In the same mountain region, there lived an old woman named Grandmother Suki who had practiced Zen for most of her adult life. She was known throughout the area for her kindness and practical wisdom. People would visit her small cottage, seeking advice about family problems, work difficulties, and spiritual questions. Grandmother Suki had one neighbor who tested her patience daily. Mr. Tanaka lived in the house next door and had strong opinions about everything. He complained loudly about other neighbors, criticized the local government, argued with shopkeepers, and regularly shared his negative views about changes happening in their village. Every morning, Mr. Tanaka would stand in his garden and make pronouncements about various problems he observed. The young people today have no respect, he would announce to anyone within hearing. The prices at the market are ridiculous. The weather is all wrong for this time of year. Nothing is as good as it used to be. Most neighbors had learned to avoid Mr. Tanaka, or to respond to his complaints with polite but brief acknowledgements before hurrying away. But Grandmother Suki lived right next door and couldn't easily avoid these daily monologues. For years, she had tried various approaches to dealing with his constant negativity. At first, she had attempted to argue with his perspectives, sharing different viewpoints about the topics he criticized. But this only seemed to energize his argumentative nature, leading to longer and more heated exchanges. Then she had tried simply agreeing with his complaints, hoping to end conversations quickly. But this encouraged him to share even more grievances, as he felt he had found someone who understood his concerns. For a while, Grandmother Suki had practiced what she thought was Zen detachment, responding to his comments with minimal acknowledgement and maintaining inner distance. But she noticed that this approach made her feel cold and disconnected, not peaceful. She was avoiding his negativity by shutting down her own openness, which didn't seem like genuine spiritual practice. One spring morning, as she worked in her garden while Mr. Tanaka delivered his usual commentary about various problems in the world, Grandmother Suki had a realization. She had been approaching their interactions with the goal of changing or managing his behavior. But what if she approached them with simple acceptance of who he was? Instead of trying to redirect his complaints or distance herself from them, what if she simply received his words as expressions of his particular way of experiencing life? What if she could listen to his negativity the same way she listened to birds singing, as natural sounds that required no response from her other than acknowledgement? That morning, when Mr. Tanaka began complaining about the noise from construction happening several streets away, Grandmother Suki tried a different approach. Instead of arguing, agreeing, or withdrawing, she simply listened with genuine attention. She noticed that beneath his complaining tone was often anxiety or concern. His criticisms of young people seemed to come from worry about changes he didn't understand. His complaints about prices reflected real financial stress. When he paused in his monologue, instead of offering solutions or counter-arguments, she simply said, "It sounds like you're concerned about many things, Mr. Tanaka." This simple acknowledgement seemed to surprise him. He looked at her more directly and responded, "Well, yes. Everything seems to be getting more difficult." "That must feel overwhelming sometimes," she offered gently. For the first time in any of their interactions, Mr. Tanaka's voice softened slightly. "It does feel overwhelming. I don't understand how the world works anymore." This small exchange opened something between them. Grandmother Suki realized that Mr. Tanaka's constant complaining was his way of trying to process a world that felt increasingly confusing and frightening. His criticisms were expressions of vulnerability disguised as authority. Over the following weeks, she continued practicing simple acceptance of his communication style. Instead of taking his negativity personally or trying to change it, she listened for the feelings underneath his words. When he complained about neighborhood children making noise, she heard his isolation and desire for connection. When he criticized changes in the village, she heard his grief for a familiar world that was disappearing. Something remarkable began to happen. As Grandmother Suki stopped resisting Mr. Tanaka's way of expressing himself, he began sharing more genuine emotions. His complaints evolved into conversations about his worries, his loneliness, his confusion about modern life. He still maintained his critical perspective, but it became less harsh and more vulnerable. Perhaps even more surprising to Grandmother Suki was how this practice affected her own inner life. Instead of feeling drained by their interactions, she began to appreciate Mr. Tanaka's honesty about his struggles. His willingness to express dissatisfaction openly, while sometimes uncomfortable, was at least authentic. Many people she knew hid similar worries behind pleasant facades. She also noticed that accepting Mr. Tanaka's difficult personality had strengthened her capacity for patience in other relationships. When other people complained or expressed negativity, she found herself responding with curiosity rather than irritation. She had developed a skill at listening for emotional truth beneath challenging communication styles. One autumn evening, as they talked over their garden fence, Mr. Tanaka surprised her by asking about her meditation practice. "Suki, you always seem so calm when I go on about my problems. How do you stay peaceful when everything around us is changing so quickly?" She considered her response carefully. "I think I've learned that most people, including myself, are just trying to find their way through confusion and difficulty as best they can. Your concerns about change are real. My meditation just helps me listen to what you're actually saying instead of getting caught up in how you're saying it." Mr. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. "I know I complain a lot. It probably gets annoying." "You express your worries honestly," she replied. "That takes courage. Many people pretend everything is fine when they're struggling." "I never thought of it that way. Everyone has their own way of processing difficulty. Some people withdraw into silence. Some people stay busy constantly. You think out loud about problems. None of these approaches is wrong. They're just different strategies for dealing with uncertainty." This conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Mr. Tanaka still expressed plenty of complaints and criticisms, but he also began sharing appreciation for positive aspects of his life. He still worried about changes in their village, but he occasionally mentioned things he was curious about rather than only focusing on what he disliked. Grandmother Suki had discovered something profound about acceptance in relationships. When you stop trying to change someone's fundamental personality patterns and instead listen for the deeper needs those patterns express, connection becomes possible even with people whose style very different from your own. She also learned that accepting someone doesn't mean agreeing with everything they say or enabling harmful behavior. It means recognizing their humanity beneath whatever difficult patterns they express. It means responding to the person rather than just reacting to their problematic behaviors. Years later, when people asked Grandmother Suki for advice about dealing with difficult family members or neighbors, she would often tell them about her experience with Mr. Tanaka. "Most people are not trying to be difficult," she would explain. "They are expressing their pain, fear, or confusion in the only ways they know how. If you can listen for what they actually need instead of focusing on how annoying their expression is, relationships can heal in surprising ways." This story demonstrates how acceptance transforms relationships from the inside out. Grandmother Suki's shift from trying to manage Mr. Tanaka's behavior to simply receiving his communications changed everything, even though his basic personality remained the same. The key insight here is that difficult people often become easier to be around when they feel heard rather than judged. Mr. Tanaka's complaints served a function for him. They were his way of processing overwhelming feelings about changes in his world. When Grandmother Suki recognized this and responded with understanding instead of resistance, he felt safe enough to express more vulnerable emotions. This doesn't mean that all difficult people will transform if you accept them. Some personality patterns are deeply entrenched and may not change significantly regardless of how you respond. but your experience of being around them can change dramatically when you stop fighting their nature and start working with it. Notice how Grandmother Suki's practice strengthened her capacity for patience in all relationships. This is one of the gifts of learning to accept difficult people. They teach you skills that benefit every interaction you have. Practicing patience with someone who challenges you develops genuine equanimity that carries into easier relationships as well. The story also illustrates the difference between acceptance and agreement. Grandmother Suki didn't start believing that all of Mr. Tanaka's criticisms were accurate. She simply stopped fighting his tendency to express dissatisfaction. She could acknowledge his feelings without taking responsibility for solving all the problems he identified. This distinction is important in many relationships. You can accept that someone has a pessimistic outlook without becoming pessimistic yourself. You can acknowledge that someone tends to be critical without defending yourself against every criticism. You can recognize that someone processes emotions differently than you do without trying to change their processing style. Acceptance in relationships often requires letting go of the fantasy that other people will meet all your needs or behave exactly as you prefer. Instead, you learn to appreciate the actual gifts that people offer while not expecting them to provide what they're not capable of giving. Mr. Tanaka couldn't offer the kind of light, positive conversation that some people provide. But he could offer honesty about human struggle, which, in its own way, was valuable. He reminded Grandmother Suki that life includes difficulty and that acknowledging this difficulty doesn't have to lead to despair. The practice of acceptance also includes recognizing that everyone is doing their best with their current level of understanding and emotional capacity. This doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it provides a context for responding with wisdom rather than reactive judgment. Sometimes the most accepting response is honest communication about how someone's behavior affects you. But this communication works better when it comes from a place of seeking understanding rather than demanding change. When you criticize my choices, I feel defensive and want to withdraw from our conversations is different from "you're too negative and need to change your attitude." The first approach describes your experience without making the other person wrong. It opens space for dialogue about how you can interact more effectively. The second approach creates defensiveness and rarely leads to positive change. As you consider these teachings about accepting others, notice where you might be spending energy trying to change people who haven't asked to be changed. Notice relationships where your frustration comes more from resisting someone's personality than from any specific harm they're causing. This doesn't mean becoming passive about genuine problems or tolerating behavior that crosses important boundaries. But it means distinguishing between someone's annoying qualities and their harmful actions. Many relationship difficulties come from trying to eliminate annoying qualities that are actually harmless expressions of someone's particular temperament. The Buddhist understanding of relationships includes recognition that everyone is conditioned by their history, their fears, their limited understanding. The person who irritates you is responding to life through filters shaped by experiences you may know nothing about. This doesn't make their difficult behavior pleasant, but it can make it more understandable and therefore easier to accept. When you practice accepting others as they are, you often discover that your resistance to their personality was creating more suffering than their personality itself. The energy you were spending trying to change them becomes available for enjoying whatever positive qualities they do possess. The monks and teachers in these stories discovered that acceptance doesn't make you weak or naive. It makes you more discerning about where to put your energy. Instead of exhausting yourself trying to change people, you focus on responding wisely to whatever they offer. This recognition brings tremendous freedom. You can love people without needing them to be different. You can maintain your own values without requiring everyone to share those values. You can experience irritation with someone's behavior without believing that their behavior must change for you to be okay. Rest now in this possibility. That relationships can be lighter when you stop carrying the weight of trying to improve other people. That love becomes more available when it's not mixed with the project of fixing someone. That acceptance creates space for authentic connection in ways that resistance never can. The mountains where these stories unfold stand peacefully, regardless of the weather that passes over them. They don't resist wind or demand sunshine. They simply remain stable through all conditions. This same quality of steady presence is available in your relationships. Not changing others, but meeting them with the kind of consistent openness that allows everyone's better nature to emerge naturally. Sleep deeply in this understanding that accepting others is not giving up on improvement or growth. It is recognizing what you can and cannot control. It is choosing to focus your energy where it can actually make a difference. And often that difference begins not with changing anyone else, but with changing how you meet whatever they offer. In a monastery garden known for its beauty, there lived an elderly monk named Enzo, who tended the grounds with extraordinary care. For 30 years, he had cultivated flowers, vegetables, and fruit trees that were admired by visitors from across the region. The garden was his life's work, and many considered it a living expression of Dharma principles made visible in earth and growing things. Enzo had developed techniques passed down through generations of monastic gardeners. He knew which plants thrived in shade, which needed full sunlight, how to prepare soil for different seasons, when to prune and when to allow natural growth. The garden responded to his attention with abundant harvests and breathtaking seasonal displays that seemed to embody the harmony between human effort and natural cycles. But one autumn, an early frost arrived without warning. Overnight, temperatures dropped far below what was normal for that time of year. Enzo woke to find that most of his tender plants had been killed. The late blooming flowers he had carefully protected through summer lay blackened and wilted. Vegetables that should have provided food for the community through winter were destroyed before they could be harvested. Walking through the devastated garden that morning, Enzo felt something he had not experienced in many years of practice. Deep grief mixed with anger at the seeming arbitrariness of the loss. All his careful planning, all his patient cultivation, all his knowledge accumulated over decades seemed suddenly meaningless in the face of forces beyond his control. Other monks in the community expected Enzo to accept the loss with the equanimity he had demonstrated in smaller setbacks over the years. They offered consoling words about impermanence and the natural cycles of growth and decay. But Enzo found these familiar teachings felt hollow in the face of such widespread destruction. Accepting the withering of a few plants was different from watching an entire season's work disappear overnight. For several days, Enzo avoided the garden entirely. When responsibilities required him to be there, he moved through the damaged areas quickly, focusing only on essential tasks without his usual mindful attention. The sight of his destroyed plants created a physical ache in his chest that he didn't want to feel. He told himself he was being dramatic, that attachment to outcomes was creating unnecessary suffering, but intellectual understanding didn't ease the actual pain he was experiencing. A week after the frost, Enzo's teacher, Master Dogen, asked him to take a walk through the damage together. They moved slowly along paths where vibrant life had given way to brown stems and blackened leaves. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Master Dogen paused beside a section where Enzo's prize chrysanthemums had been growing. The elaborate blooms he had been nurturing for months to peak perfectly in late autumn lay collapsed, their colors turned to brown and black. "Tell me what you see here," the master said quietly. "I see destruction, waste, all that careful work brought to nothing. Look more carefully. What else is present?" Enzo looked again, reluctantly. At first, he saw only the devastation he had been avoiding for days. But as he stood longer in one spot, forcing himself to really observe, other details began to emerge. The frost had killed the tender flowering tops of plants, but many of the root systems remained alive underground. Some of the hardier perennials showed new green shoots already emerging at their base. Seeds from this year's flowers lay scattered in the soil, some probably already beginning the slow process of germination that would lead to next year's blooms. "I see that some things survived," he admitted. "And what else?" This was harder. Enzo looked beyond the immediate area of flower beds to places where wild plants grew along the garden's edges. The native grasses and trees that had adapted to local conditions over many years showed no signs of frost damage. Their deep roots and hardy constitutions had carried them through the same cold that destroyed his more delicate, cultivated varieties. "I see that what belongs to this place naturally was not harmed." Master Dogen nodded. The frost was not personal. It was not punishment for any error in your gardening. It was simply weather arriving when weather arrives. Your pain comes not from the frost itself, but from your expectation that nature should follow your timeline rather than its own. They continued walking. In sections where vegetables had grown, Enzo saw that underground crops like carrots and potatoes had been little affected. Root vegetables seemed almost improved by the cold shock, their natural sugars concentrated by the sudden temperature change. "I had planned to harvest these gradually over several weeks," Enzo said, looking at the potato beds. "Now they must all be dug at once. And is this necessarily problematic? It's different from what I planned. More work in a shorter time. Some may not store as well as if they had been harvested slowly. But they still provide food for the community? Yes. Actually, some seemed sweeter than usual." As they walked, Master Dogen shared stories of other gardens he had known, other gardeners who had faced similar setbacks. He spoke of droughts that taught communities to value water differently, floods that revealed which building foundations were truly solid, insects that showed which plants had developed genuine resistance rather than just temporary protection. Each difficulty reveals something that steady conditions keep hidden, the master explained. Your garden has been teaching you about nurturing growth under ideal circumstances. Now, it teaches you about what endures when conditions are not ideal. Both lessons have value. Enzo found himself looking at the damaged garden differently. The plants that had died quickly in the frost were often ones that required constant protection and careful management. Their beauty was real, but their survival depended on conditions remaining consistently favorable. The plants that survived were often less spectacular but more resilient, able to adapt to unexpected challenges. I have been growing some things because they were beautiful rather than because they belonged here, he realized. And now you have information about which approach creates lasting success. Over the following weeks, as Enzo worked to clear away dead vegetation and prepare beds for winter, he found that the physical work helped process his grief about the loss. Each plant he composted became part of the soil that would nourish next year's growth. Nothing was truly wasted, only transformed from one stage of the cycle to another. But perhaps more importantly, the shock of losing so much so quickly had broken open something in his relationship with uncertainty. He had believed, without quite realizing it, that careful planning and skillful effort could protect against all major setbacks. The frost taught him that some forces remain beyond human control regardless of expertise or preparation. This lesson extended beyond gardening. Enzo began to notice how often he approached all aspects of life with the assumption that sufficient effort should guarantee desired outcomes. The frost had shown him that this assumption, while motivating, also created vulnerability to exactly the kind of devastating disappointment he had just experienced. Spring came eventually, and with it an opportunity to apply what the difficult autumn had taught. Enzo planted differently that year. He focused more on native varieties that had proven their ability to survive local conditions. He created less elaborate displays and more robust ecosystems. He prepared for seasonal changes rather than hoping they would be mild. The garden that emerged was less dramatic in some ways than what he had created before, but it possessed a quality of groundedness that his previous efforts had sometimes lacked. It seemed to belong more completely to the place where it grew. And when the next early frost arrived several years later, the damage was much less severe. The early frost was a harsh teacher, Enzo would later explain to new gardeners who came to learn from his approach. But it taught me things about resilience and adaptation that decades of favorable weather could not. I learned that beauty and durability are not opposites, and that working with natural limits often produces better results than trying to transcend those limits through constant management. The Buddhist understanding of dukkha, often translated as suffering, includes recognition that pain serves important functions in conscious development. Like the frost in Enzo's garden, difficulty often reveals what is truly stable versus what only appears stable under protected conditions. When life challenges our assumptions and plans, we discover which aspects of our understanding can withstand pressure and which need revision. Enzo's initial resistance to loss was natural and understandable. The garden represented years of devoted effort, and its destruction felt like a negation of all that work. But his willingness to eventually examine the damage closely allowed him to extract valuable information from the painful experience. He learned things about gardening, about his own expectations, and about working with uncertainty that would make his future efforts more realistic and effective. The master's guidance pointed to something profound about how wisdom emerges from difficulty. Problems often show us the places where our approaches need adjustment. The frost revealed that Enzo had been prioritizing immediate beauty over long-term sustainability, cultivation over adaptation to local conditions. This wasn't wrong, but it was incomplete, and the setback provided correction that he might not have discovered through success alone. Pain and human experience often function similarly. Relationship difficulties show us patterns that need attention. Health problems reveal where we may need to adjust our lifestyle choices. Work frustrations often point to places where our expectations don't align with reality. The information contained in these painful experiences can guide more skillful responses if we're willing to examine it rather than just trying to escape discomfort as quickly as possible. This doesn't mean seeking out pain or believing that suffering is inherently positive. The frost damaged Enzo's garden whether he learned from it or not. but his willingness to work with the damage creatively allowed him to extract value from the loss that simple endurance or denial would not have provided. The Buddhist concept of the middle way includes learning to neither seek difficulty nor avoid it when it arises naturally. Like Enzo learning to plant species that could handle local weather variations rather than constantly protecting delicate varieties from natural conditions, we can learn to develop inner qualities that work with life's inherent uncertainty rather than requiring constant protection from challenges. In a small mountain village, there lived a fisherman named Kenji who had learned his craft from his father and grandfather before him. For 20 years he had worked the same mountain lake, understanding its moods, its seasons, the habits of different fish species as they moved through deeper and shallower waters. Fishing was not just his livelihood but his meditation, his way of practicing patience and attention while providing for his family. Kenji had developed reliable patterns over the years. He knew which areas of the lake produced well in different seasons, which weather conditions brought fish closer to the surface, how to read the subtle signs that indicated good fishing days versus difficult ones. His neighbors often remarked on his consistency, his ability to return with food even when other fishermen found the lake uncooperative. But one spring, something changed in the lake ecosystem. Heavy rains in the mountains had altered water temperatures and nutrient levels. Construction of a new road had changed drainage patterns. The fish populations that Kenji had known for decades seemed to have disappeared almost overnight. Day after day, he would set out with his usual equipment to his familiar spots and return with empty nets. At first, Kenji assumed this was temporary. Mountain lakes often went through brief periods of poor fishing. He tried different locations, different times of day, different bait and techniques. But weeks passed without improvement. 0, 5. His family's food stores began to dwindle, and neighbors started offering help that he was reluctant to accept. The practical problems were serious, but the emotional impact surprised Kenji even more. His identity had become deeply connected to his skill as a fisherman. He took pride in his ability to read the lake, to provide reliable sustenance through his knowledge of its patterns. When his expertise suddenly failed to produce results, he felt lost in ways that went beyond immediate concerns about food and income. Sitting by the empty lake one evening after another unsuccessful day, Kenji felt something close to despair. All his years of learning seemed meaningless. The lake that had been his teacher and partner now felt foreign, almost hostile. He questioned not just his fishing technique, but his understanding of the natural world, his place within it, his ability to navigate uncertainty. An elderly woman named Grandmother Hannah lived in a cottage near the lake shore. She had watched Kenji's struggles with compassion, but had waited to offer advice until she sensed he might be ready to receive it. That evening, she approached him as he sat staring at the still water. "The lake feels different these days," she said quietly, settling beside him on the rocky shore. "It's not the same lake anymore," Kenji replied with bitterness. "Everything I learned about fishing here seems useless now." "Tell me, what did you learn during all those years of successful fishing?" 0, 5. Kenji considered this. "I learned patience. How to read subtle signs. How to adapt my approach to different conditions. How to remain still and alert for long periods." "And do you still possess these qualities?" "I suppose so. But they don't help when there are no fish to catch." Grandmother Hannah was quiet for several minutes, watching the sunset reflect off the water. "I've lived by this lake for 70 years, she eventually said. I've seen it go through many changes. Times when certain fish disappeared completely, only to return years later. Times when new species appeared. Times when the water itself seemed to sleep. How do you bear watching something you love change beyond recognition? I learned that loving the lake meant loving all its phases, not just the ones that served my needs. The lake has never existed for my benefit alone. It follows its own rhythm, responds to forces much larger than my daily concerns. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. Then Grandmother Hana asked, "What if this difficult time is teaching you something that good fishing could not? What could it possibly teach me that 20 years of successful fishing didn't? What has this struggle revealed about your relationship with uncertainty?" Kenji thought about this honestly. It's shown me that I had become dependent on predictable outcomes. I thought my skill guaranteed success. When that guarantee disappeared, I felt helpless. And what else? That my sense of identity was too narrow. I defined myself by my ability to catch fish rather than by deeper qualities. Yes. And what have you learned about receiving help from others? This was harder to admit. That my pride made it difficult to accept support when I needed it. That I had been thinking of myself as self-sufficient when actually I was dependent on conditions remaining stable. Grandmother Hana nodded. The empty nets have been teachers too, haven't they? Over the following months, as Kenji struggled with continued poor fishing, he began to apply these insights practically. He started accepting help from neighbors when it was offered, which strengthened community bonds he hadn't realized had grown weak during his years of easy success. He learned other skills that could supplement fishing income, discovering that diversifying his capabilities made him more resilient. Perhaps most importantly, he began to relate differently to uncertainty itself. Instead of seeing unpredictable outcomes as personal failures, he started viewing them as natural aspects of depending on wild systems that followed their own patterns. This shift didn't eliminate his preference for good fishing days, but it reduced his suffering during difficult periods. The lake gradually recovered some of its fish populations, though never exactly as they had been before the environmental changes. When Kenji's nets began filling again, his appreciation for abundance had deepened. He no longer took good fishing for granted, understanding now how quickly conditions could change despite all human preparation and skill. The empty nets taught me humility, he would later tell aspiring fishermen who came to learn from his experience. They showed me the difference between skill and control, between confidence and arrogance. They revealed strengths I didn't know I had, and weaknesses I hadn't recognized. I wouldn't choose to repeat that difficult time, but I wouldn't trade what it taught me either. The fisherman's story illustrates how setbacks can reveal dependencies and assumptions that success keeps hidden. When conditions remained favorable, Kenji could maintain the illusion that his skill guaranteed outcomes. Only when that guarantee was removed did he discover both his over-reliance on external conditions and his inner resources for handling uncertainty. Buddhist philosophy recognizes this pattern throughout human experience. We often discover what we're attached to only when it's threatened or removed. We learn about our expectations only when they're not met. We find out what truly sustains us only when surface supports disappear. Kenji's empty nets served as what Zen traditions sometimes call great doubt, experiences that shake fundamental assumptions and create space for deeper understanding to emerge. The comfortable certainties that guide daily life can sometimes prevent growth because they don't require us to question or develop beyond our current level. When the fisherman learned to see himself as someone learning to navigate uncertainty rather than someone who should be immune to uncertainty, his relationship with difficulty transformed. The empty nets became information rather than judgment, experience rather than failure, teacher rather than enemy. Grandmother Hana's perspective represents the wisdom that comes from observing many cycles over time. She had witnessed the lake through various phases and understood that each period offered its own lessons and gifts. What seemed like devastating change from the perspective of human plans appeared as natural variation from the perspective of longer time frames. This doesn't minimize the real hardship that unexpected change can create. Kenji's family needed food, and his fishing skills had provided that need for many years. The practical challenges were genuine and required real solutions. But the suffering that came from believing the change shouldn't be happening, or that it reflected personal inadequacy, was optional and could be addressed through shifting perspective. The fisherman's eventual return to more productive fishing, though under changed conditions, illustrates another aspect of how difficulty teaches. Often, after working through major challenges, we find that previous capacities return but are now held more lightly. Success becomes appreciated rather than expected, provisional rather than permanent, gift rather than entitlement. Both Enzo and Kenji discovered that their painful experiences revealed important information about how to live more skillfully. The gardener learned to work with natural limitations rather than constantly fighting them. The fisherman learned to hold his expertise more humbly while developing backup resources for difficult times. These weren't consolation prizes for suffering, but authentic wisdom that emerged through engaging difficulty with awareness rather than just enduring it. The composting process that Enzo used with his dead plants provides a model for how conscious beings can work with painful experiences constructively. Raw pain, like fresh organic matter, often needs time and proper conditions to break down into elements that can nourish growth. Trying to rush this process or skip it entirely usually prevents the nutrients from becoming available. This suggests that healing from difficulty often requires patience with our own natural rhythms of integration. Just as gardens need time between destruction and renewal, humans often need periods of apparent non-productivity while processing major challenges before new insights and capabilities can emerge. Pain often provides information that pleasure cannot offer. Comfort tends to reinforce current patterns and approaches, while discomfort signals that something needs attention or adjustment. Like a fever that indicates infection, emotional or spiritual pain often points to areas where growth is needed or healing is required. This doesn't make pain pleasant or mean that we should seek it out. But it suggests that when difficulty arises naturally, approaching it with curiosity rather than pure resistance can reveal valuable guidance about how to live more wisely. The empty nets taught Kenji things about humility, community, adaptability, and the nature of security that full nets could never have shown him. The frozen garden taught Enzo lessons about resilience, sustainability, and working with rather than against natural limitations that endless growing seasons would have kept hidden. Both men found that their painful experiences ultimately strengthened their capacity for the very activities they thought the pain threatened. Kenji became a more versatile and humble fisherman. Enzo became a more skilled and realistic gardener. Their suffering served their growth in ways that constant success could not have achieved. Let these stories rest in your awareness now without needing to apply them immediately to your own life. The wisdom they contain doesn't require force or analysis to be helpful. Like seeds that germinate in their own time when conditions are right, insights often take root gradually and reveal their relevance when it's most needed. The Buddhist understanding of pain as a teacher doesn't demand that you feel grateful for your difficulties or pretend that suffering is pleasant. It simply suggests that since pain is inevitable in human experience, relating to it with awareness and patience often yields more beneficial results than relating to it with pure resistance and resentment. Your own painful experiences contain information about what you most need to learn, what requires healing, where your assumptions may need revision, what strengths you possess that haven't been fully developed. This information becomes available not through thinking about pain, but through staying present with it long enough for its teachings to emerge naturally. The breath itself demonstrates this principle. Each exhale involves a small death, a letting go of what you were holding. Each inhale involves a small birth, a taking in of what comes next. This cycle includes moments that might feel like loss and moments that feel like renewal, but the whole process serves the continuation of life. Nothing is wasted in the great composting of human experience. Everything breaks down eventually into elements that can nourish new growth. Your pain, your loss, your moments of feeling lost or broken have all been contributing to the rich soil from which your understanding continues to bloom. As we continue on our journey together, we come to something that sounds simple but proves endlessly challenging. The present moment. This awareness that is always available yet somehow easy to miss while the mind travels to yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's worries. Zen practice offers a gentle return, not through force or discipline alone, but through discovering that presence itself has a quality of peace that makes returning to it feel like coming home. Tonight we explore how ordinary moments can become doorways to profound stillness when met with simple attention. In a monastery tucked into a hillside forest, the daily schedule was marked not by bells or gongs, but by gentle sounds that invited rather than demanded attention. There was no grand meditation hall with elaborate decorations. Instead, the monks practiced awareness throughout their ordinary activities, finding the sacred within the mundane rhythm of community life. Brother Takeshi had a simple responsibility that he had maintained for over 15 years. Each morning and evening, he would sweep the main pathway that connected the monastery buildings. It was not complicated work. The path was made of smooth stones with packed earth between them, bordered by carefully tended gardens on both sides. When Takeshi first arrived at the monastery as a young man, he had approached this task with the efficiency he had learned in his previous life as a city worker. Wake early, gather the broom and dustpan, move quickly along the path, removing leaves and debris, finish the job, move on to the next responsibility. The work took perhaps 20 minutes if done briskly, leaving more time for what he considered the real practice of meditation and study. But his teacher, an elderly monk named Jisho, had suggested a different approach. The pathway teaches many things to those who pay attention while sweeping it. He had mentioned one morning as Takeshi hurried past with his cleaning supplies. Perhaps it would be worth discovering what those teachings are. Takeshi had not understood what could be learned from such a routine task, but he respected his teacher and decided to experiment with moving more slowly. The next morning, instead of rushing through the sweeping, he deliberately took more time. He noticed details he had previously overlooked. The way morning dew made certain leaves stick to the stones, while others lifted easily. How the sound of the broom changed depending on whether he was sweeping wet or dry surfaces. At first, this slower approach felt inefficient and somewhat frustrating. His mind would wander to other tasks that needed completion, plans for the day, questions about teachings he had read the night before. But gradually, something began to shift in his relationship with this simple work. he started to notice that the pathway showed different patterns each day. Some mornings brought heavy accumulations of fallen leaves that required patient, systematic clearing. Other mornings revealed just a light scattering of debris that could be gathered quickly. Rainy periods created muddy patches that needed careful attention. Dry spells left dust that required a different sweeping technique entirely. Instead of treating these variations as obstacles to completing the job efficiently, Takeshi began to see them as information about natural cycles and changing conditions. The pathway was teaching him about seasons, weather patterns, the life cycles of the plants and trees that surrounded it. What had seemed like mindless work started to feel like a conversation with the environment. Perhaps more importantly, he began to notice his own mind's patterns as he swept. Some days he felt energetic and alert, moving with ease and satisfaction through the work. Other days he felt tired or distracted, and the same simple task seemed burdensome. Some mornings his thoughts were clear and focused. Others brought mental chatter that pulled his attention away from the immediate activity. Rather than judging these variations in his mental state, Takeshi learned to observe them with curiosity. He discovered that trying to force concentration when his mind felt scattered usually made the distraction worse. But accepting whatever level of attention was naturally available and working with it gently often led to moments of surprising clarity and presence. One morning, several months into this more mindful approach to sweeping, something unexpected happened. As Takeshi moved slowly along a section of the path, completely absorbed in removing autumn leaves that had fallen overnight, he suddenly realized that his usual mental commentary had completely stopped. For perhaps 10 or 15 minutes, there had been only sweeping. No thoughts about yesterday or tomorrow. No internal dialogue about the work itself. Just the simple motion of the broom, the sound of leaves gathering, the feeling of his feet steady on the stones. The experience was not dramatic or mystical. It was simply a period of complete presence with the activity at hand. But the quality of peace that pervaded those moments was unlike anything Takeshi had experienced during formal sitting meditation. There was no sense of trying to achieve a particular state of mind. 0, 5. No effort to maintain concentration. Just natural absorption in the immediate task. When his teacher Jisho walked by later that morning and asked about the path cleaning, Takeshi tried to describe what had happened. "Master, while sweeping this morning, I seemed to disappear into the activity." There was no sense of someone doing sweeping, just sweeping happening by itself. It felt incredibly peaceful, but also ordinary. Jisho smiled knowingly. "And what did you learn from this experience?" "That presence isn't something I have to create or achieve. It's already here when I stop interfering with it." "Excellent. And what else?" Takeshi considered this. That any activity can become a doorway to awareness if I bring genuine attention to it. The sweeping itself wasn't special, but my quality of attention made it feel sacred. Yes. The path you clean each day is also the path to awakening. Not because sweeping has magical properties, but because full attention to any present moment reveals the nature of awareness itself. Over the following years, Takeshi's morning and evening sweeping became the foundation of his spiritual practice. Not in a rigid or prescribed way, but as a daily opportunity to return to presence, to notice the quality of his attention, to practice meeting whatever conditions arose with acceptance and care. Some days the sweeping still felt routine. Other days it opened into profound stillness. He learned not to chase the extraordinary moments or judge the ordinary ones. Each encounter with the pathway offered its own teaching about staying present with whatever was actually happening rather than seeking some other experience. Word of Takeshi's approach to his simple work began to spread among other monastics in the community. Young monks who were struggling with formal meditation would question him about how ordinary activities could become spiritual practice. His response was always the same: pick one simple task that you do regularly. For several weeks, bring your complete attention to that task whenever you do it. Notice what happens when you stop rushing through it and start participating in it fully. Many discovered that washing bowls mindfully was as powerful as sitting in meditation. Others found that walking between buildings with genuine presence brought the same quality of awareness that years of reading sacred texts had been pointing toward. The monastery developed a culture where every activity was potentially sacred if met with appropriate attention. Formal meditation teaches you to recognize the quality of presence, Takeshi would explain to visitors who were curious about their approach. But daily life gives you countless opportunities to practice maintaining that presence in the midst of activity. The sweeping doesn't make you enlightened, but it shows you that enlightenment is not separate from engaging fully with whatever you're doing right now. This story illuminates the Zen understanding that awakening is not found by transcending ordinary experience, but by meeting it with complete attention. The pathway that Takeshi swept each day was both literally the path between monastery buildings and metaphorically the path to understanding the nature of awareness itself. What transformed routine work into spiritual practice was not the activity, but the quality of presence Takeshi brought to it. This points to something profound about how awareness operates. It is not dependent on special conditions or extraordinary experiences. It is always available in whatever is happening right now when that experience is met without the mental overlay of distraction, judgment, or the desire to be somewhere else. The monk's discovery that presence emerges naturally when interference stops reflects a core Zen insight. Awareness is the natural state of consciousness. The challenge is not creating awareness, but learning to notice and trust the awareness that is already present beneath the constant movement of thoughts and preferences. Takeshi's initial approach to sweeping represented how we often move through daily life. Efficient, goal-oriented, focused on completion rather than participation. This approach accomplishes tasks but misses the deeper nourishment that comes from full engagement with present experience. When he learned to slow down and pay attention, routine work became a doorway to the very peace that formal meditation aims to cultivate. The experience of disappearing into the activity points to something profound about the nature of self and presence. When complete attention is given to immediate experience, the usual sense of being separate from that experience often dissolves. There's no longer someone doing something and something being done. There's just the activity itself, arising naturally within awareness. This dissolution of subject-object duality is often described in mystical terms, but Takeshi's experience shows how it can emerge through the simplest activities when they're met with wholehearted presence. The sacred is not hidden behind the ordinary. It is revealed through bringing sacred attention to ordinary moments. Brother Takeshi's influence on the monastery community illustrates how present moment awareness becomes contagious when it's embodied rather than just discussed. Other monks were drawn to investigate their own daily activities more mindfully, not because they were lectured about the importance of presence, but because they witnessed the peace and authenticity that emerged from Takeshi's approach to his simple work. The suggestion to pick one regular activity and practice bringing complete attention to it offers a practical entry point for developing present moment awareness. Rather than trying to be mindful of everything all at once, focusing on a single, repeated activity allows you to notice the difference between distracted participation and full engagement. In a village at the foot of the mountains, there lived a tea master named Saito, who was known for her exceptional skill in the traditional ceremony. Students traveled from distant cities to learn from her, drawn by descriptions of the profound peace that seemed to emanate from her simple tea preparation. Her movements were fluid and graceful, each gesture deliberate yet natural, creating an atmosphere where time seemed to slow down and ordinary concerns fell away. But Saito had not always possessed this presence and skill. Years earlier, when she first began studying the way of tea, she had approached it as she approached most things in her busy life, as something to accomplish efficiently so she could move on to the next item on her list. She had memorized the proper sequences of movements, learned the traditional forms, and acquired the necessary utensils and knowledge. Yet something essential was missing from her practice. Her teacher, an elderly woman named Yukiko, had tried various ways to help Saito understand what she was overlooking. But Saito was impatient with subtleties that didn't produce immediate, measurable results. She wanted to master the ceremony quickly so she could begin teaching others and establish herself as skilled in this respected art. One afternoon, after Saito had completed what she considered a technically perfect tea preparation, Yukiko made an unexpected observation. "Your tea is correctly made," she said quietly. "But you were not here while you made it." Saito felt puzzled and slightly defensive. "I followed every step precisely. My attention never wavered from the proper forms." "Your attention was on performing the forms correctly, but where were you?" "I was right here, preparing tea." Yukiko said nothing more that day, but she suggested that for the next week, Saito should prepare tea only for herself. Not for practice, not to demonstrate her growing skill, not with any goal other than simply making and drinking tea when she was genuinely thirsty. This suggestion felt almost insulting to Saito. She had been working hard to develop expertise, and now her teacher was asking her to step backward into informal practice. But she respected Yukiko enough to follow the guidance, despite her frustration. The first few days of this informal tea preparation felt awkward and pointless. Without the structure of formal practice or the motivation of impressing her teacher, Saito found herself rushing through the process just to have tea to drink. She boiled water quickly, used whatever cup was convenient, and paid minimal attention to the details she had been working so hard to perfect. But gradually, something began to shift. Without the pressure of performance or the anxiety of being evaluated, Saito started to notice aspects of tea preparation that had been invisible to her during formal study. The sound of water beginning to heat, progressing from silence to subtle whispers to rolling boil. The way steam rose from the cup and how its warmth felt against her face as she brought it to her lips. The actual taste of the tea, which she realized she had often barely noticed while concentrating on proper technique. One morning, as she prepared her simple cup of tea before beginning other daily activities, Saito found herself moving more slowly than usual. Not because she was trying to be mindful or demonstrate presence, but because something about the morning light, the quietness of the house, the simple pleasure of warm tea on a cool day made hurrying feel inappropriate. As she poured water over the tea leaves, she noticed that her breathing had naturally slowed and deepened. Her usual mental planning for the day ahead had quieted. There was just the immediate sensory experience of warmth, fragrance, the gentle sound of pouring water. For the first time since beginning her studies, she was completely present with the activity of making tea rather than thinking about making tea or performing tea preparation. When she lifted the cup to her lips and tasted the result of this naturally mindful preparation, the difference was startling. The tea seemed more flavorful, more complex. But beyond that, the entire experience had a quality of richness and satisfaction that her technically superior formal preparations had never achieved. That afternoon, when she met with Yukiko for her regular lesson, Saito shared what had happened during her morning tea. "Teacher, I think I understand now what you meant about not being present. This morning, I wasn't trying to make good tea or practice correctly. I was simply making tea because I wanted tea, and everything felt different." Tell me more about this difference. When I focus on performing the steps correctly, part of my attention is always evaluating how I'm doing, whether my movements are precise, whether I'm remembering everything properly. But this morning, there was no evaluation. Just the immediacy of water, tea, warmth, taste. Yukiko smiled. "And how did this tea taste compare to your most technically perfect preparations?" 0. 5. Much better. Not because my technique was superior, but because I was actually experiencing the tea instead of thinking about the process of making it. Now you begin to understand the way of tea. The forms and techniques are important because they free attention from having to decide what to do next. But their purpose is to create space for presence, not to become objects of attention themselves. Over the following months, as Saito continued integrating this understanding into her formal practice, her entire relationship with the tea ceremony transformed. Instead of performing sequences of movements that she had memorized, she began participating in each gesture as it arose. Instead of demonstrating her knowledge of proper forms, she used those forms as a framework within which genuine presence could unfold. The difference was immediately apparent to anyone who sat with her for tea. The atmosphere that had been somewhat tense and performance-oriented became spacious and peaceful. Students stopped feeling like they were watching a demonstration and started feeling like they were participating in a shared meditation. The tea ceremony is not about tea, Saito would later explain to her own students. It is about using the simple act of preparing and sharing tea as an opportunity to practice complete presence. When you are fully here while making tea, the tea becomes a vehicle for awareness itself. Years later, when Saito had become a respected teacher, she would often share the lesson that Yukiko had given her about the difference between performing presence and actually being present. Many students work very hard to appear mindful, she would explain. They move slowly and deliberately, attend carefully to details, follow all the prescribed forms with great precision. But this is not mindfulness. This is thinking about mindfulness while doing other things. True presence in any activity emerges when you stop trying to be present and start actually participating in what you're doing. It's the difference between watching yourself make tea and simply making tea. One is performance, even if the audience is only yourself. The other is participation. The way of tea became for Saito a daily practice that extended far beyond formal ceremony. She brought the same quality of natural presence to cooking, cleaning, conversation, and solitude. Each activity became an opportunity to return to immediate experience, rather than living always one step removed in thoughts about that experience. This story reveals how presence is actually quite different from the concentrated effort that people often mistake for mindfulness. Saito's discovery that her tea improved when she stopped trying to make it perfectly points to the difference between forced attention and natural awareness. When she was focused on correct performance, part of her attention was always split. Some awareness was on the immediate task, while another part monitored and evaluated her performance. This division created a subtle tension that prevented full engagement with the experience itself. The informal tea preparation allowed her to discover what happens when attention is not divided between doing and evaluating doing. When the goal shifted from demonstrating competence to simply enjoying tea, her natural awareness could settle completely into immediate sensory experience. This illustrates something profound about how presence operates. It is not something you create through effort, but something you allow by reducing interference. When the mind stops dividing experience into performer and performance, subject and object, awareness naturally becomes absorbed in whatever is happening. The tea ceremony's forms and traditions served an important function once Saito understood their purpose. They weren't ends in themselves, but scaffolding that could support natural presence. By providing a structure for movement and attention, the forms freed her from having to constantly decide what to do next, creating space for awareness to rest in immediate experience. This points to something valuable about how contemplative practices work. Whether it's tea ceremony, walking meditation, or simple daily activities, external structure can support inner stillness. But the structure must be held lightly as a container rather than as the content itself. Saito's teacher understood that presence cannot be taught directly because it's not something you add to experience. It's what's already here when you stop adding mental commentary, evaluation, and projection. The week of informal practice wasn't a step backward, but a way of discovering what had been missing from all the correct technique. The transformation in atmosphere when Saito began teaching from genuine presence rather than demonstrated knowledge illustrates how awareness affects not just individual experience, but the quality of relationship and environment. When someone is authentically present, it creates permission for others to be present as well. Her insight about the difference between performing presence and being present applies far beyond tea ceremony. In meditation, people often work hard to appear mindful to themselves, carefully monitoring their posture, breath, and mental states. But this self-conscious mindfulness can actually prevent the natural absorption that emerges when attention settles into direct experience. The same principle appears in conversations, where listening with effort to seem like a good listener is different from simply being interested in what someone is saying. It appears in work, where trying to be mindful while performing tasks creates a different quality of engagement than becoming absorbed in the tasks themselves. Saito learned that presence is more like falling asleep than like lifting weights. You create the right conditions and then allow something natural to occur rather than forcing it to happen. When she stopped trying to make perfect tea and simply made tea with care and attention, presence emerged on its own. Both stories in this artifact point to the same essential teaching. Presence is not an achievement, but a return. Not something exotic that requires special conditions, but the natural result of meeting whatever is happening with complete attention. The monk sweeping the path and the woman preparing tea both discovered that ordinary activities become extraordinary when met with wholehearted participation. Not because the activities themselves change, but because undivided attention reveals qualities of richness, peace, and connection that scattered awareness overlooks. This understanding transforms daily life from a series of tasks to be completed into opportunities for moments of genuine presence. Without needing to withdraw from the world or create special meditation schedules, awareness can be cultivated through bringing full attention to whatever is already happening. The breath is perhaps the most immediate teacher of this principle. Each inhale and exhale happens only once. This breath will never occur again in exactly this way. When attention settles naturally into breathing without trying to control or improve it, the simplest act becomes a doorway to profound stillness. The present moment is not a place to arrive, but the only place you ever actually are. Past and future exist only in thought, even when those thoughts are useful for planning or learning. But life itself unfolds only now, in the immediate flow of sensation, breath, awareness. Notice how even reading these words is happening now. The understanding that arises from them emerges in present awareness. There is nowhere else to go to find what these teachings point toward. No future moment when presence will be easier or more complete than it can be right here. When presence becomes natural rather than effortful, daily life transforms without changing. The same activities continue, but they're met with increasing intimacy rather than distance. Work becomes more satisfying when engaged with full attention. Relationships deepen when presence is offered rather than just physical proximity. Even difficulty becomes more manageable when met directly rather than through the lens of resistance and mental commentary. The pathway is already beneath your feet. The tea is already in your hands. The moment you've been seeking is always this one. Not because this moment is always pleasant, but because it's always real. And in that reality, stepped into fully, lies the peace that thought can only think about, but presence can actually touch. The present moment asks nothing of you except presence itself. And presence asks nothing except willingness to be where you actually are instead of where you think you should be or wish you were. This willingness is sufficient. This moment is complete. This awareness is home. As we continue on our journey together, we arrive at something that touches every person who has ever tried to make something happen. The attachment to results. The way we pour our hearts into work, relationships, or dreams, and then feel disappointed when things don't turn out as we hoped. Tonight, we explore one of the deepest forms of letting go. How to act with full care and effort while holding the results lightly. In a small village, there lived a carpenter named Hiroshi who had learned his craft from his father and grandfather. For 20 years, he had built homes, furniture, and small buildings with great care and skill. Each project received his full attention. He would select materials thoughtfully, plan carefully, and work with the patience that creates lasting quality. But Hiroshi carried a burden that made his work feel heavier than it needed to. He worried constantly about whether his customers would be satisfied, whether his work would last as long as he hoped, whether people would appreciate the care he put into each piece. After finishing a project, instead of feeling satisfaction, he would often lie awake wondering if he had made the right choices, if the wood would age well, if his craftsmanship was truly good enough. This worry had begun to affect not just his sleep, but his enjoyment of the work itself. While carving or joining pieces of wood, part of his attention was always jumping ahead to imagine how the finished product would be received. Instead of being present with the immediate task of shaping wood, he was mentally rehearsing conversations with customers or worrying about problems that might arise years in the future. One autumn, an old monk named Master Chen visited the village and commissioned Hiroshi to build a simple meditation bench. It was not a complicated piece, just a low wooden seat that would allow comfortable sitting during long periods of practice. But Master Chen made an unusual request. "I would like you to build this bench," he said, "but I want you to know that I may never use it." Hiroshi felt confused. Why would you commission furniture you might not use? "I am very old," Master Chen explained. "My time in this body may end before your work is complete. Or I may find that my knees are too stiff for sitting when the bench is ready. Or I may discover that I prefer to practice in a different way. I cannot promise you that your efforts will result in the outcome you envision. Then why have me build it at all? Because building with care has value independent of how the finished product is used. I want to commission good work, not guaranteed results." This perspective puzzled Hiroshi, but he agreed to take on the project. As he began working on the meditation bench, he found Master Chen's words returning to him frequently. For the first time in years, he was building something where the purpose might never be fulfilled in the expected way. Yet the old monk had seemed genuinely pleased to offer this commission. At first, this uncertainty made the work feel strange and somewhat pointless. If the bench might never serve its intended function, why put his usual care into selecting the perfect wood, planning the most comfortable proportions, smoothing every surface to silky perfection? Part of him wanted to simply build something adequate, since there was no guarantee it would ever be properly appreciated or used. But something deeper in Hiroshi resisted this approach. His hands knew how to work with care, and they seemed to want to continue working that way regardless of what might happen to the finished piece. As he shaped and smoothed the wood, he began to notice that the satisfaction came not from imagining the monk's eventual use of the bench, but from the immediate experience of working skillfully with good materials. Working on a project with uncertain outcomes gradually revealed something that 20 years of worrying about results had hidden from him. He loved the work itself. The smell of freshly cut wood, the feel of grain beneath his hands, the satisfaction of joints fitting perfectly together. These pleasures existed completely independent of what happened after the work was done. As the weeks passed and the bench neared completion, Hiroshi realized that his usual anxiety about customer satisfaction was absent. Without the pressure of needing the outcome to justify his efforts, he could simply enjoy the process of creating something beautiful and functional. Each day of work felt complete in itself rather than just a step towards some future validation. When Master Chen returned to see the finished bench, his reaction surprised Hiroshi. Instead of examining the workmanship or testing the comfort as most customers did, the old monk simply placed his hand on the smooth wood surface and smiled. "This was made with love," he said quietly. "How can you tell?" "Because love always shows in the quality of attention given to small details. Look at these corners, this smoothness, the way these pieces fit together. This kind of care comes only when someone is present with their work rather than focused on what the work will bring them." Master Chen did end up using the bench regularly during the remaining months of his life. But more importantly for Hiroshi, their conversation had revealed something about his relationship with all his work that transformed his experience of carpentry from that day forward. "I used to think that good results validated good work," Hiroshi would later tell his apprentices. "But I learned that good work is its own validation. When you build with care and skill, that care and skill exist whether or not the final outcome meets anyone's expectations. The wood receives your attention. Your hands develop greater sensitivity. Your mind learns patience and precision. These benefits exist independent of what happens to the things you create. Now, when I work, I still hope for good results. But I don't depend on those results for satisfaction. The satisfaction comes from doing the work well, from being present with each task, from offering my skills fully to whatever project is in front of me. This shift in approach had effects that reached beyond Hiroshi's shop. His customers began to notice something different about the furniture he built. It had a quality of groundedness and care that made even simple pieces feel special. When asked about this change, Hiroshi would explain that he had learned to build for the joy of building rather than only for the outcome of having built. When you work with attachment to specific results, he would say, part of your energy goes into worrying about those results instead of into the work itself. But when you let go of needing particular outcomes and focus on working skillfully, more of your energy actually goes into the project. The results often improve, but more importantly, you enjoy the process. This story illustrates something that applies far beyond carpentry. When we attach our sense of success and satisfaction to specific outcomes, we often reduce our effectiveness at achieving those very outcomes. Worry about results divides attention between what we're doing now and what might happen later. But when we learn to find satisfaction in the quality of our effort itself, we can give our full energy to present tasks. Hiroshi's experience shows how holding outcomes lightly actually serves those outcomes better than gripping them tightly. His bench building was more skillful when he wasn't anxious about its reception. His enjoyment of carpentry increased when he wasn't measuring each project against future validation. The Buddhist understanding of non-attachment includes this insight. Clinging to results often interferes with the very actions that create good results. When you desperately need something to work out in a particular way, that desperation usually makes you less effective at making it work out. But when you can act with full commitment while accepting whatever comes, you often perform better while suffering less. Master Chen's commission was a teaching about the difference between caring about your work and being attached to its reception. Caring means bringing your full attention and skill to whatever you're doing. Attachment means needing the results to validate your worth or efforts. The first supports good work. The second often undermines it. Hiroshi discovered that satisfaction could come from the process itself rather than only from external validation. This doesn't mean that results don't matter. It means that results become secondary to the quality of engagement you bring to your efforts. When the work is its own reward, good outcomes become gifts rather than requirements. This principle appears everywhere in human activity. Students often learn better when they're focused on understanding rather than grades. Athletes often perform better when they're absorbed in playing rather than fixated on winning. Artists often create better work when they're engaged with the creative process rather than concerned primarily with recognition. The carpenter's story also reveals how non-attachment can improve relationships and reduce conflict. When Hiroshi stopped needing specific responses from customers to feel good about his work, he could interact with them more naturally. He was less defensive about criticism and less dependent on praise. This made his business relationships easier and more authentic. In a mountain village, there lived a young woman named Midori who had devoted herself to growing vegetables for her community. She had read extensively about sustainable farming methods, learned from experienced gardeners, and worked long hours preparing soil, planting seeds, and tending her crops with great care and hope. But farming, she discovered, involved factors completely beyond her control. Weather could destroy months of careful work in a single day. Insects might prefer her organic vegetables to the pesticide-treated crops on neighboring farms. Plant diseases could spread despite all her preventive efforts. Even when everything went well on her land, market conditions might mean that abundant harvests brought little income. In her first few years of farming, These uncertainties created constant stress for Midori. She would check weather forecasts obsessively, worry about every pest she noticed, and lose sleep during the vulnerable periods when crops were flowering or approaching harvest. When problems did arise, she took them as personal failures, signs that she hadn't worked hard enough or planned carefully enough. The worst year came during her 4th season, when a late spring freeze killed most of her early plantings, summer droughts stressed the replanted crops, and autumn rains ruined much of what had survived to harvest time. By winter, Midori felt defeated. All her knowledge and effort seemed meaningless in the face of forces that dwarfed human planning and preparation. During that difficult winter, an elderly farmer named Kenji, who lived in a neighboring valley, heard about her struggles and offered to share what he had learned during 40 years of working the land. They met monthly through the cold months, and their conversations gradually helped Midori understand farming from a completely different perspective. "You are trying to control the uncontrollable," Kenji observed after hearing about her approach to growing food. "You work as if perfect planning and effort should guarantee perfect results. But the earth doesn't work that way. Weather follows patterns larger than any single season. Insects and diseases respond to conditions you cannot predict or manage. Even the soil has its own rhythms that don't always match human intentions. But if I can't control outcomes, why put effort into farming at all? Because growing food well requires great skill and attention, even though skill and attention don't guarantee particular results. You learn to read soil conditions, to time plantings wisely, to recognize and respond to problems early. These abilities have value whether or not any specific crop succeeds." Kenji explained his own approach to the uncertainties of farming. "Each season I plant with full care and attention. I use everything I know about selecting varieties, preparing soil, managing water, protecting plants from pests. But I plant knowing that some years will bring abundance, other years will bring loss, and most years will bring something in between. How do you handle the disappointment when crops fail despite good work? You can influence outcomes through skillful effort, but you cannot determine them through will alone. This recognition brings both humility and freedom. Tomorrow will bring new opportunities to practice this letting go. New chances to offer your best efforts while holding outcomes lightly. New invitations to find satisfaction in doing good work, rather than only in having worked successfully. And in that practice, something in you will continue to ripen and deepen, whether or not you notice the process, whether or not others see the changes, whether or not the growth follows any timeline you might prefer. The path continues not because you control its direction, but because you keep walking it with sincerity and care. That is enough. That has always been enough. Rest now in this simple sufficiency. As your breath naturally slows and your body settles into rest, let yourself feel the gentle completeness of this journey we have taken together. Through muddy paths and unexpected rain, through the wisdom of impermanence and the tenderness of self-compassion, through accepting others and learning from pain, through presence and letting go, you have been exploring the most natural thing in the world. The simple willingness to meet life as it actually island. Acceptance is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It is a practice you return to again and again, each time life presents something new or challenging or beautiful. Each breath offers another opportunity to soften resistance. Each moment invites you to choose presence over struggle. Each encounter with difficulty becomes a chance to remember that fighting what is already here only adds suffering to whatever is naturally difficult. You don't need to remember everything from these stories and teachings. You don't need to become perfectly accepting or never feel frustrated again. You only need to know that there is always another way to meet whatever comes. A way that includes your humanity while offering something deeper than reactivity. A way that honors your feelings while not being controlled by them. A way forward that flows with life instead of constantly pushing against it. The path of acceptance is walked one step at a time, one breath at a time, one moment of gentle allowing at a time. Rest now in this knowing. Let sleep come naturally, without forcing or resisting. Let your dreams carry you gently through the night's own rhythms of rest and renewal. And know that when you wake, acceptance will still be available, waiting patiently like an old friend, ready to meet whatever the new day brings, with the same quiet wisdom that has held you through tonight's journey into peace.